Hey everybody. We're going to continue our discussion of imperfect competition today with a focus on oligopolies. So there are actually three types of imperfect competition and only one type of perfect competition. And today we're going to be focused on this model right there. So you've seen this continuum before with perfect competition being the most competitive, pure monopoly being the least competitive, and oligopoly is closer to the pure monopoly side. So what are some characteristics? Usually there are a few large producers. The term oligo comes from the word few. So there's a few large producers. There's actually something called the four-firm concentration ratio, which takes the largest four firms in an industry, and if they represent more than a certain percentage of the market, then you know you have an oligopoly. So, for example, the top four firms in the hog industry represents about 80%. So you can bet that if you are eating pork, you're probably getting it from one of those four producers. The products could be identical or differentiated, in the terms of hogs, it's going to be identical. Oil, it's going to be identical, but you can also have an oligopoly with a car company, and those are differentiated. So high barriers to entry, definitely some control over price, but the big thing is this idea of interdependence. Um, the firms use strategy because they are most often competing against someone very specific, as opposed to under perfect competition, where their product is exactly the same as everyone else. In this case, they're going to use strategy and game theory to figure out what their opponent is going to do. Some examples, obviously, the OPEC oil cartel, cereal companies, car producers, etc. So here are the types of barriers to entry. Um, First of all, economies of scale. The car industry is very difficult to enter because only large firms can make cars at the lowest cost. That's why you haven't seen very many new car companies. Tesla is the exception, and they had a very specific uh, new type of car, obviously. New car companies are not popping up overnight because the firms, Toyota, Nissan, Ford, Chevrolet, those companies have figured out how to make cars at the lowest cost for decades. It's the same. High startup costs are another barrier to entry. But you can also have oligopolies where you actually own the raw materials. So, for example, if you own all the hogs, you're going to be in line to be able to dominate that industry. So we're going to be solely focused on game theory when we are talking about oligopolies. If you look up oligopolies on the internet, sometimes they will talk about something called a kinked demand curve. We're not going to do that. We're gonna solely focus on game theory as the way we discuss oligopolies. So game theory is the study of how people behave in strategic situations, and understanding game theory will help us determine how an oligopoly maximizes profit. So you could still, oligopolies definitely still fine where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, MR equals MC, but this is going to be a slightly different way of looking at that. So here's a simulation. I'm going to give you a question. I want you to stop the video and think about it for a second. You're an ice cream salesman at the beach. You have identical prices as another salesman, and beachgoers will purchase from the closest salesman. They don't care. You guys are selling the same items. They just want to go to the person that's closest. And people are evenly distributed along a crowded beach. Each morning, the two firms pick locations on the beach. Where is the best location? So go ahead and pause the video and think about that for a second. Well, you should if you went first, you should put your firm in the middle of the beach, obviously. Firm A is going to decide to go first in the middle of the beach. But where should firm B choose to go? Uh, if you think about this logically, firm B should set up right next to firm A. This is because no matter where firm A chooses, the best spot to be is right next to firm A so that you can basically be the closest to the other part of the beach that was not chosen, right? So even if A does not choose the middle and chooses off to one side, you're best going right next to A to make sure that you get the most customers. How is this observed in the real world? Well, how many times have you gone into a city and seen a Starbucks coffee shop and then looked right across the street and seen another Starbucks coffee shop? Or seen two competitive coffee shops right next to each other or very, very close? Or even seen gas stations right across the street from each other? So that is some strategic game theory placement of their businesses based on where the revenue is coming from. So yeah, there you go. So again, we see this word interdependent. Why learn about game theory? Oligopolies are interdependent since they compete with only a few other firms. Their pricing and output decisions must be strategic, and game theory helps us. So let's look at how game theory actually comes down on paper. There's this classic prisoner's dilemma. Two people are charged with a crime. They're separated, and they have to go into the interview, and they basically have two choices: to deny or confess. And what you have here is a matrix, and you got to get really comfortable looking at this. But here's the matrix that they're facing. If they both deny, they both get 5 years in jail because they can't sort of put the most egregious crime onto them because they don't really know what happened. If they both confess, they both get 10 years in prison because they both confess to a much more serious crime. And if prisoner 2 confesses, he goes free, but only if prisoner 1 denies, and he gets the most stringent because he gets the sole responsibility for a very heinous crime. And the same happens for prisoner 1. So where do they end up in this box? Well, because they would love to end up in this box where they both deny, and that would be collusion. But they can't really trust because they're not in the same room and they can't see what the other prisoner does. And this is where you do something that's called, you look for the person's dominant strategy. So the way that you do a dominant strategy is very specific. Take prisoner 1. You ask yourself, if prisoner 2 denies, what is my best option? If prisoner 2 denies, my best option is to, in fact, to confess, because free is better than 5 years. Okay? So my best option in that situation is to confess. But what happens if prisoner 2 confesses? Well, again, my best option is to confess because 10 years is better than 20 years. So I have a dominant strategy, and my strategy is to confess. And prisoner 2 has the same dominant strategy, to confess. So if they both confess, they're both going to end up with 10 years in prison. Even though, if they could figure out a way to collude, they would be better in this box, that because of their dominant strategies, they're going to end up in this box. So here's just another matrix to look at. We're going to look at a bunch of these. So you and a partner have competing firms. You can either price your product high or low. Take a look at this scenario and pause the video and see if you can figure out their dominant strategies. Okay. So again, I'm going to go through it again. Firm 1, you ask yourself, if firm 2 went high, what would be my best option? Well, my best option would be to go low because $30 is higher than $20. Okay, so I want to go low if they go high. Now, what if firm 2 went low? Okay, again, my best option would be to go low. So this is a dominant strategy for firm 1. He's going to go low no matter what. Let's look at firm 2. Do they have a dominant strategy? So you ask yourself, if firm 1 went high, what would firm 2 do? Well, firm 2 would go low, just like in the first situation. But let's ask the second question. If firm 1 went low, what would happen there? So they're looking at either $0 or $10, and $10 is better. So again, both of them have a dominant strategy. They're going to end up in the low box. Okay. Notice again that you have an incentive to collude and get $20 of profit, but the incentive to cheat is also there because if they go high, you can go low and make even more, and so you both end up in this low box. Okay, so one more time. Dominant strategy is the best move to make regardless of what your opponent does. So, if firm 1, let's look for the dominant strategy of firm 1. If firm 2 goes high, what should firm 1 do? They should go high. 100 is better than 80. But if firm 2 goes low, what should they do? They should also go high. So firm 1 has a dominant strategy of high. Let's flip that around. We're now pretending that we're firm 2. If firm 1 goes high, firm 2 should go low. Okay. What happens if firm 1 goes low? Then firm 2 should go high. So wait a second. If firm 1 goes high, they should go low, but if firm 1 goes low, they should go high. So they do not have a dominant strategy. Okay? So firm 1 had a dominant strategy of high, and firm 2 has no dominant strategy. So where are they going to end up? Well, firm 1 is going to go high no matter what, and firm 2 is then going to go low. Okay? So they're actually going to end up in this box, right? And you know, unless they can somehow talk about it, you know, they're not going to be able to figure that out, and they're going to end up in that box. Okay. So we're going to skip this. This is a video called Golden Balls, which is going to be in your soft chalk. It's really funny and it's great to watch. It's from a game show called Split or Steal, and I recommend that you really take a look at it. So we're going to skip through those slides. But what did we learn? We learned that oligopolies must use strategic pricing because they do have to worry about what the other person is doing. They do have a tendency to collude to gain profit. The collusion is the act of cooperating with a rival in order to rig a situation. And however, collusion results in an incentive to cheat. And so that's where the dominant strategies come in, because if you have a dominant strategy, you're gonna make that choice regardless of what what your opponent is telling you to do. So I have here two great practice problems, and so what I'm going to tell you to do is simply pause the video because I've only got a minute left and attempt to answer the following questions. Okay, and then the next slide, so go ahead, pause it now, and then the next slide, there's a completely different practice problem, but I want you guys to have the chance to work with this, okay? Because these are the type of questions that you will see on your final exam for oligopolies, okay?